The woman carefully unlocked the apartment door and stepped inside. It was dark, far too dark for the middle of the day. No lights were on. There was no television, no sound of footsteps, only a heavy, oppressive silence. Then she heard voices coming from deeper inside the apartment. A man and a woman were sitting there. Both stared straight ahead with empty, sightless eyes. A chill ran down her spine. Shortly before his death, her own son had also lost his eyesight. A coincidence? No. At that moment, she realized that behind a chain of bizarre injuries, deaths, and so-called accidents stood a single person. Someone everyone trusted without question. A perfect manipulator, a perfect liar, a perfect killer. Today's story is about a kind of perfection you would never want to encounter in real life. The story of the perfect psychopath. Lim could not stop thinking about the charming woman he had met the previous evening in downtown Seoul. She was beautiful, tall, elegant, and slender, with a soft voice that seemed to soothe everyone around her. Her name was In-suk. She presented herself as a woman from a wealthy family who had received an excellent education. There was an air of confidence and dignity about her that was impossible to ignore. Lim decided he had to see her again, and he did. Before long, the two realized they did not want to be apart. They moved in together and enjoyed a luxurious lifestyle. Showered both Lim and his family with expensive gifts. At one point, she surprised him with an SUV worth 30 million won, roughly $25,000 to $30,000 at the exchange rate of the time. They were genuinely happy and making plans for the future. Then, only 6 months later, Lim suddenly lost consciousness, collapsed, and fractured his tailbone. Appeared devastated. She barely left his bedside at the hospital, staying with him almost constantly. Lim was deeply touched by her devotion. With such attentive care, his recovery was swift. But from that moment on, misfortune seemed to follow him everywhere. He became clumsy. He frequently fell. He suffered burns and other injuries. Each time, blamed herself for not paying closer attention and preventing him from hurting himself. Yet the accidents only became more severe. A month after his first fall, Lim woke up unable to open his eyes. His eyelids were swollen shut. Rushed him to the hospital. She devoted herself to caring for him despite the fact that she was pregnant. Lim begged her to leave him and move on with her life. She refused. While he remained hospitalized, she legally registered their marriage, determined to prove that she would never abandon him. Unfortunately, on February 12, 2003, the young husband died. While his family cried beside his hospital bed, quietly slipped away. For the first time in months, she could finally breathe a sigh of relief. Her next insurance payout was on the way. In reality, Eum's parents were hardworking and modest people. They raised their daughter and 2 sons in a household where discipline, responsibility, and diligence were expected. Her early childhood appeared completely normal. There were no warning signs, no dramatic events, nothing that suggested what she would eventually become. But as grew older, something darker began to emerge beneath her pleasant exterior. People who knew her during her teenage years later described her as demanding, self-centered, and manipulative. Years later, psychologists would identify traits associated with what is often called the dark triad: narcissism, psychopathy, and chronic manipulative behavior. Combined, these traits can create the psychological profile of someone capable of extraordinary cruelty. Unlike the values her parents tried to instill in her, Eum's ambitions were not restrained by conscience. If she wanted something, she took it. It was therefore not surprising that criminal tendencies appeared while she was still in school. One day, she secretly gave a classmate sleeping pills, stole his credit card, and went shopping. It was an early glimpse of a pattern that would later become far more sinister. As she grew older, became an exceptionally attractive young woman. She was tall and slim, with delicate features, but her most striking characteristic was her eyes. Intense, expressive, and difficult to ignore. Some people later compared her appearance to that of actress Park Shin-hye. Understood the power of her beauty and used it skillfully. She could reinvent herself depending on her audience. With a few strokes of makeup, she could appear seductive and irresistible. At other times, she could project innocence and vulnerability if that image served her better. Flirting came naturally to her. Men were drawn to her beauty and captivated by her dark, magnetic eyes. She often persuaded them to buy gifts far beyond their financial means, leaving them burdened with debt while she moved on without the slightest hint of guilt. People trusted her instinctively. Her charm was the perfect disguise. After graduating from school, Im met a young man named Lee. Their relationship progressed quickly. Lee was captivated by her beauty, confidence, and the mysterious aura she carried. Even when she stood right beside him, she somehow seemed unattainable. Not long after they met, he proposed. Both families believed the couple was rushing into marriage, but neither Lee nor Im listened. They were married in April 1997. In July 1998, Im gave birth to their daughter. At first, everything appeared normal. Im worked for an insurance company, while Lee was employed by a freight transportation company. He was not wealthy, but he was dependable and hardworking. He believed that persistence and sacrifice would eventually provide a comfortable future for his family. Im saw things differently. She found their modest lifestyle unbearable. Eventually, she left both her husband and infant daughter and moved back in with her parents. Soon afterward, her father died. Without consulting her mother or brothers, Im immediately began spending money using his credit card. The incident caused serious conflict within the family, forcing her to return to Lee and their daughter. Happy to have his wife back, Lee threw himself into work. He accepted overtime shifts, denied himself even basic comforts, and tried to earn enough to satisfy her expectations. He convinced himself that her demands were temporary. Surely things would improve. They never did. Nothing was ever enough for Im. Designer clothes, luxury cosmetics, dinner at the city's most expensive restaurants. If she wanted blue crab, she bought it. If she wanted an expensive handbag, she bought it without even looking at the price. 6 days a week, from 10 in the morning until 7 in the evening, she spent her time shopping or relaxing at luxury spas. Meanwhile, Lee watched his salary disappear. Not a single one was being saved for their daughter's future. When he finally tried to explain that they needed to think about their child, the conversation ended in an argument. Im had no interest in compromise. Instead of helping the family's finances, she quit her job at the insurance company. From that moment on, every financial burden fell on Lee's shoulders. Then, in February 2000, tragedy struck. Their 3-year-old daughter was playing near the staircase in their apartment building when she fell, struck her head, and died. Her death was ruled an accident, but it also marked the moment when Im's crimes took an even darker turn. Only 2 months later, she visited a psychiatrist, claiming she was struggling with disturbing thoughts. The doctor prescribed medication that, in large doses, could cause severe drowsiness, confusion, and even memory loss. Im had no intention of taking it herself. Instead, she purchased several insurance policies for her husband: health insurance, accident insurance, life insurance. Every policy listed her as the sole beneficiary. Years later, she admitted what she had been thinking at the time. Just imagining all the money my husband's body could earn for me made me feel good. She no longer needed medication. Lee had poor eyesight. Because of it, people already considered him clumsy and prone to falling. To Im, it was the perfect cover. Early in 2000, she slipped her prescription medication into one of his drinks. After he lost consciousness, she pushed him down a flight of stairs. The injuries earned her her first insurance payout, $340,000 won. Roughly $246. It wasn't enough, so she continued. Whenever Lee fell asleep under the effects of the drugs, Im attacked him. She pushed him downstairs. She kicked him. She slammed his head against the floor. When he regained consciousness, he remembered nothing. It all felt like a terrible nightmare, but the bruises covering his body were very real. Whenever doctors asked what had happened, Im answered in the same calm, gentle voice. Her husband had always been somewhat clumsy. His poor eyesight made accidents inevitable. His injuries matched her explanation. The doctors believed every word. None of them knew that while Lee recovered in hospital, his wife was filing yet another insurance claim. To Im, her husband's body had become an ATM, but the payouts grew smaller. The excitement faded. She needed something more. In May 2000, she again drugged Lee until he lost consciousness. What happened next was so horrific that even seasoned investigators later described it as monstrous. She climbed onto the bed beside her unconscious husband, carefully lifted one eyelid, then the other. Using a long metal pin, She deliberately injured both of his eyes. When she finished, she calmly closed his eyelids and waited. Later, she described the feeling herself. "When I think about the joy my husband's suffering will bring me, thrills run through my entire body." Several hours later, Lee awoke in agony. His eyelids were swollen shut. He felt as though someone had pierced his eyes. The pain became unbearable. He begged his wife to take him to the hospital. Hospital staff admired Am. They believed she was the picture of devotion. Whenever doctors entered the room, they saw only a loving wife caring for her blind husband. They never saw the smile that appeared on her face after everyone left. To them, it was a tragedy. To her, it was income. Over the next 2 years, Am collected dozens of insurance payouts from multiple companies. After Lee lost his sight completely, he became entirely dependent on her. She used that dependence against him. More falls, more beatings, head injuries, burns, bruises. On one occasion, she even poured boiling cooking oil onto his face. Every time she calmly insisted it had been another unfortunate accident. No one questioned her. From the outside, Lee simply appeared to be a blind man who constantly hurt himself. Eventually, he began believing it himself. His own mother praised Am endlessly, convinced her son had married an extraordinary woman. She had no idea that while Lee sat alone in complete darkness, his wife spent insurance money in Seoul's luxury boutiques, beauty salons, and exclusive nightclubs. Eventually, even Am realized the injuries were becoming difficult to explain. She came up with a new idea. If accidents no longer seemed believable, perhaps people would believe a suicide attempt. One night after Lee had fallen asleep, she placed a knife in his hand and stabbed him in the abdomen. Investigators later believed she intended to strike his liver and kill him. Instead, she pierced his intestines. Panicking or pretending to panic, she called emergency services. She tearfully claimed that her blind, severely depressed husband had tried to kill himself during a mental breakdown. But the plan failed. Lee survived. That only meant she would have to try again. On March 25, 2002, 27-year-old Lee finally died. In the weeks leading up to his death, he developed cellulitis, a serious bacterial infection that spreads rapidly through soft tissue and can lead to organ failure if left untreated. He came heartbreakingly close to an eerie milestone. Had he survived just 2 more attacks, Am would have received exactly 60 insurance payouts. Instead, she collected 58. That means Lee was assaulted, on average, every 1 or 2 weeks for nearly 2 years. By the time he died, his suffering had earned his widow approximately $230,000. At just 24 years old, Am was now a financially secure widow with what appeared to be her whole life ahead of her. She returned to the lifestyle she loved: shopping, luxury, and nightlife. Only a month after Lee's death, she met another man at a nightclub. His name was Lim. Unlike her first husband, Lim was a former athlete. He was healthy, physically strong, financially comfortable, and held a stable office job. Am never told him she had been married before. Instead, she built an entirely new identity. She claimed to come from an extremely wealthy family. She said she had received an elite education. She explained that her family spent most of their time overseas, which conveniently meant Lim would never be able to meet them. She looked the part: designer clothes, luxury handbags, expensive jewelry. She even bought Lim lavish gifts, including a brand new SUV. There was no reason for him to doubt anything she said. He believed he had met the perfect woman. The couple moved in together. At first, their life together seemed ideal. Then history began repeating itself. Lim suddenly fainted. Soon afterward, he became unusually clumsy. He suffered one accident after another. Then he unexpectedly lost his eyesight. After that came burns, more injuries, and finally, just like Lee before him, he died from cellulitis. Even after his death, Am never abandoned her performance. She participated in a traditional Korean posthumous marriage ritual, a symbolic ceremony honoring a deceased partner. To Lim's relatives and friends, it looked like the ultimate expression of love and devotion. No one suspected they were watching a murderer. Because Am was pregnant, Lim's family gently encouraged her to terminate the pregnancy and begin a new life while she was still young. Historically, in South Korea, raising a child alone was often viewed as an obstacle to future relationships due to social expectations and family responsibilities. Although attitudes have gradually changed, especially in cities like Seoul, those beliefs were still common at the time. Aum refused. She insisted she would keep the baby. That decision only reinforced everyone's belief that she was a devoted widow. No one imagined that everything had been planned from the beginning. Working for an insurance company had taught Aum exactly how the industry operated. She knew which claims resulted in the largest payouts. Death came first. Permanent blindness came second. Fire-related losses ranked third. She had already mastered the first two. The third was still waiting. No matter how much money Aum obtained, it disappeared almost immediately. The insurance payout from Lim's death vanished just as quickly as the previous one. She understood that a third dead husband would almost certainly attract suspicion from insurance investigators, so she turned her attention toward her own family. Using her newborn son as an excuse, she reconciled with her mother and brothers and moved back into the family home. Only weeks later, on July 26, 2003, she mixed medication into a glass of pomegranate juice and offered it to her mother, claiming it was extremely healthy. After her mother fell asleep, Aum quietly imagined what she would buy with the insurance money. She later admitted that the thought of designer handbags excited her. Then she repeated the same horrifying ritual she had performed on her husbands. This time, instead of a metal pin, she used the needle of a syringe. Her mother permanently lost sight in one eye. Once again, Aum flawlessly adopted a new role. No longer the devoted wife. Now she became the caring daughter. 4 months later, she prepared another glass of pomegranate juice. This one was for her older brother. After he lost consciousness, she decided to try something different. Instead of using a needle, she poured hydrochloric acid directly into both of his eyes. He was left permanently blind. Unlike her husbands, neither her mother nor her brother had been insured by Aum herself. Their insurance policies already existed, and they were supposed to receive the compensation personally, but they trusted her completely. They allowed her to withdraw the money on their behalf. She took every dollar she could, approximately $55,000 from her mother's insurance, and $65,000 out of her brother's $160,000 settlement. Predictably, the money did not last. Soon, Aum found herself desperate again. Her older brother remained hospitalized, blind, helpless, and entirely dependent on those around him. Aum came to visit. Something about her voice unsettled him. Perhaps losing his eyesight had sharpened his other senses. Or perhaps, deep down, he already feared the truth. As Aum approached his bed, he felt the blanket move. Then he noticed someone tugging on his intravenous line. Instinctively, he grabbed the catheter and held it tightly. At that exact moment, a nurse entered the room. She may have unknowingly saved his life. Hidden behind Aum's back was a syringe filled with a bronchodilator. Injected in the wrong circumstances, it could have triggered a fatal cardiac event. The nurse never saw it. Aum quietly left the room. She never visited her brother again. He had narrowly escaped becoming her next victim. Even then, he struggled to believe his own sister could be responsible. Instead, he convinced himself that both he and his mother must have developed some rare hereditary disease that had suddenly stolen their eyesight. I'm sure that by this point, a question has crossed your mind. 2 husbands, a mother, and a brother of Aum all went blind. Couldn't anyone connect the dots and realize that something strange was happening? No, because each incident happened separately from the others. After the death of each husband, Aum simply cut off all contact with their families, and the victims and their relatives never crossed paths. But not everyone accepted this explanation. The mother of Aum's second husband, could not understand why her daughter-in-law had completely erased them from her life. The woman desperately wanted to see her little grandson. Several months later, she tracked her daughter-in-law down to her family's apartment. She was surprised to discover that it was an ordinary apartment in an ordinary neighborhood, not the billionaire's mansion Aum had described. But her shock at that discovery was nothing compared to what she felt when she stepped inside. She was greeted by Aum's brother and mother, both of whom had suddenly lost their eyesight, just like her late son. That was when she realized it was not a simple coincidence. Her son had not died of natural causes. She rushed to the police with this information, but they simply did not believe her. By Christmas 2004, once again broke and desperate, In-suk secretly sold the family apartment for $80,000. She had already spent almost all the money by the time her mother and brothers found out and asked where they were supposed to go now. They simply did not yet know that their fate had already been decided. When In-suk was a child, her older and younger brothers annoyed her because she felt they were getting things that belonged to her. But now she was glad to have a large family, because they could bring in more money. She set the apartment on fire with her mother and brothers still inside, after first drugging them with pomegranate juice mixed with medication. Her older brother, who had begun to doubt his sister, did not want to accept the pomegranate juice from her hands. He said so openly, which immediately sent In-suk into a rage. To calm her down, he pretended to drink the beverage. Although he only swallowed a tiny amount, it was enough to make him fall asleep. When the young man woke up, he was sitting on the sofa with a twisted, burning newspaper in his hand. Of course, he could not see, but he felt the smoke and the heat and realized that the room was on fire. Fortunately, thanks to him, everyone managed to escape. However, they suffered severe burns. Since she had burned down the only apartment where she could live, In-suk needed to find someone willing to take her in. That kind soul turned out to be Mrs. Kang, a nanny who had previously worked for her. In-suk asked if she could stay at her home for a few days until she and her son found new housing. The woman could not refuse to shelter a young mother with a small child in her arms. But weeks passed, then even a month, and the guest showed no sign that she planned to leave. At the same time, she had no intention of compensating the woman and her family for the inconvenience. Unable to continue supporting 2 extra people, the nanny asked In-suk to move out the next day. Enraged by this request, In-suk waited until nightfall, set a towel on fire, and threw it into the bedroom where the woman and her husband were sleeping. She wrapped herself and her son in wet towels and walked out of the burning apartment. As a result of the fire, the kind-hearted host and her daughter were left with lifelong burn scars, while the woman's husband died. But In-suk could not simply stand by and watch the victims receive treatment in the hospital. This was the first crack in her illusion of control. In mid-April, she entered the burn unit where her former nanny and her daughter were recovering. She brought a horrifying surprise with her, a plastic bottle filled with gasoline inside a shopping bag. Consider the cruelty of it, starting a fire in a ward full of patients who had already suffered from a fire. Fortunately, the hospital had security cameras installed. The staff quickly extinguished the flames and the police arrested In-suk. However, she was arrested only in connection with the hospital arson. The police knew nothing about her other crimes, so when she claimed that she needed to take care of her blind mother and brother, as well as her sick young son, the judge agreed not to keep her in custody. The charges against her were not dropped. She was simply allowed to remain free while investigators continued their work. But In-suk was beyond saving, and even after this, she did not stop. She resumed contact with a woman named Yu. Yu was around 30 years old. The 2 women had met several years earlier, when In-suk's first husband, Lee, was recovering in the hospital. In-suk visited Yu at her home and offered her a special drink. She mixed an antidepressant with strawberries crushed in a blender. That was the last thing Yu remembered. Of course, In-suk had not insured her. When the victim regained consciousness, she discovered that her credit card was missing, along with the $4,500 that had been on it. The next victim of the relentless killer was another acquaintance, a woman in her early 20s. She was the girlfriend of a patient recovering in the same hospital where In-suk's young son was being treated. In-suk stole her credit card as well, but fearing that the crime would eventually be discovered, she committed another one. She gave the victim an antidepressant disguised as a weight loss pill and pierced her right eye with her constant companion, a pin. The stolen money was used, among other things, to cover her son's medical expenses. In-suk's 3-year-old son was diagnosed with Kawasaki syndrome, a disease that primarily affects children under 5 and causes inflammation of the blood vessels. It is usually successfully treated. However, on April 1st, 2005, the boy died. And here is what is strange. Doctors could not explain his death. The child had been recovering and was expected to be discharged when he suddenly died from cardiac arrest, which physicians believed was a complication of the illness. Until this point, In-suk had only been suspected of arson, but investigators began looking at the case differently when, just days after her release, The younger brother of one of the victims walked into the police station and said something unexpected. He told detectives that terrible things kept happening to his older sister. "Everyone who enters my sister's circle of acquaintances either dies or gets injured." He urged them to stop treating these incidents as separate accidents and finally see the bigger picture. By April 19th, investigators had gathered enough evidence to arrest In-suk again and formally charge her. At that time, she was dating a new man, and it seemed he had been incredibly lucky. During questioning, In-suk told detectives that her actions had been caused by mental disorders and an addiction to illegal substances. But the specialist she had consulted had never diagnosed her with any disorder, and there was no trace of illegal drugs in her system. However, after she claimed that she had set the hospital fire because she wanted to see the spirit of her deceased daughter in the flames, In-suk was sent for a psychiatric evaluation. During the examination, she was asked to take Robert Hare's psychopathy checklist. She scored an astonishing 40 out of 40 points. In-suk was a perfect psychopath. Even Ted Bundy and Jeffrey Dahmer scored lower. But while many psychopaths are capable of living among others without breaking the law, In-suk seemed almost incapable of stopping herself. She was constantly overwhelmed by boredom. She needed new emotions, stronger and stronger stimulation. But the pleasure always faded quickly, forcing her to search for the next dose. For people like this, nothing is ever enough. It is like a thirst that can never be quenched. After receiving nearly $1 million by the exchange rate of that time, In-suk spent the money on entertainment, expensive brands, and a luxurious lifestyle. If not for her final desperate and foolish act of arson, she would not have stopped. In-suk was completely beyond rehabilitation. Even in prison, where she is serving a life sentence, she continues to complain that her clothes and toiletries are not from the brands and labels she was accustomed to. She wrote letters to the detective who handled her case, asking him to buy her various personal care products. The man joked that even his own wife did not use such expensive things. Why should he buy them for In-suk? Simply because she had become accustomed to having every desire fulfilled immediately? But her current demands are only a distant echo of the lifestyle she once had, the lifestyle that pushed her toward committing crimes. Irreversible harm in exchange for temporary comfort, again and again. Even among the most terrifying serial killers, there is often a boundary between victims and family. In-suk erased that boundary. Her mother, her brother, her husbands who loved her, and possibly even her 3-year-old daughter and 3-year-old son. No one was untouchable. When psychiatrists called her a perfect psychopath, they were not talking about intelligence or theatrical evil. They were describing something far worse, a person capable of causing catastrophic harm without regret, without guilt, and without showing a single emotion on her beautiful face.